Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. We're just going to take a few more minutes as I see that we are populating the room, which is exciting and actually fantastic. Everybody is looking forward to this webinar. So if you can just be patient and give us just a couple of minutes, we'll be getting started. In the meantime, please enter where you're joining us from in the chat and introduce yourself. Please feel free to do that. That's the audience, not the panel. We know Dr. Shahid is going to have you all introduce yourself. Wow, people from everywhere. Welcome, everyone. Hi, Bernice. Thank you, Randy. We'll give it just a few more minutes. Is that okay, Dr. Shahid? Hi, Jessica. Welcome, Omega and Brenda. So it looks like we're slowing down a little. Maybe we should go in and get started. All right. So I will kick us off. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Adrienne Hollis. I'm the Vice President for Environmental Justice, Public Health, um, and Community Revitalization and Resilience. And I said that backwards, so don't hold that against me. Here at the National Wildlife Federation. Welcome, everyone, to the second in a series of CECC roundtables on artificial intelligence data centers. For those who attended last month, we focused on data centers, perspectives, local perspectives, and community impacts. This month, we're focusing on policy and public health insights. Our roundtable discussion hopefully will explore, among other things, the public health implications of large-scale data centers, the environmental justice dimensions of siting these facilities in communities, any regulatory or policy issues, and most importantly, the solutions, policy solutions that can ensure progress. And we invite you to not only put questions in the question and answer section, but comments are welcome also. So this is not a conversation that is just focused on what the fact that we don't need data centers. I mean, that we're not going to have data centers or we're going to stop data centers because we know in a lot of instances, we're not going to be able to do that. So this is about aligning innovation with public health protections and environmental justice and responsible governance. As policymakers and advocates and researchers and community leaders, we have an opportunity and a responsibility to shape the framework that protects us while supporting technology in a way that benefits us. So we're looking forward to a thoughtful and solutions-oriented dialogue. And I want to thank you again for being part of this very important conversation. This evening's moderator is a good friend of mine, Dr. Khalil Shahyd, who was actually a panelist last month in January. Dr. Shahyd is a senior strategist in the Green Finance and Economic Development Program at the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC, where he leads their work on leveraging environmental and climate solutions to address the deepening crisis of poverty and inequality. His current research and advocacy interest is in addressing the risks associated with AI data centers. I also want to let you know that Dr. Shahyd will be presenting, or we'll be having a discussion with him on a podcast in the next couple of weeks that will be published. I know you didn't know that, Dr. Shahyd, that is coming out next week, and we'll make sure that you all get the link to that podcast. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shahyd. I'm very excited to do so and welcome him and hand this over.
Thank you. Welcome everyone, and thank you NWF for creating this space and hosting this space for us to have this very important conversation, a series of conversations, and to everyone who are joining us tonight. Again, a special thank you to you all. Whether you are fighting against a data center permit, or whether you're dealing with a data center that's already in operation in your community, or if you're trying to figure out what is a data center, or if you're trying to figure out, why Netflix canceled my favorite show, this is the spot for you to be in tonight. And so thank you for taking this time, especially for those of us on the East Coast in, early evening, going into your dinner time. So thank you for taking this time with us. I'm going to do just a round robin with our panel and allow them to introduce themselves. We have a series of questions that we have prepared, but I'll try as much as we can to be very flexible and allow you all as a panelist to kind of dictate where the conversation goes. And as questions come in, I'll be monitoring the question chat. And so if there's something that is particularly relevant, to the conversation, I may bring that question up. Otherwise, we're going to try to keep most of the questions to the end, and we will do our best to make sure that we have ample time, for those questions. So I'll start to my left in the screen. Amy, if you want to just to give a quick introduction for yourself, and we'll pass it on from there. Oh, I'm sorry, Amy. Margulies, we'll start with you first. I forgot that there was two of you here tonight.
Oh yeah, there are. Hi, thanks so much for having me tonight, and thanks again to folks for joining in the evening on the East Coast. My name's Dr. Amy Margolis. I'm the executive director for Tucker United, which is a grassroots coalition that's based in Tucker County, West Virginia. And I'm just going to leave it there. I'm sure we'll get into more about all of our backgrounds.
And the other Amy, I'm Amy Adams. I am the Deputy Director at the Southeast Climate and Energy Network. I will add that prior to that, I was the Regional Supervisor for the North Carolina Division of Water Quality, which is why I have some expertise in the water piece of this. So I will pass it on.
Pablo?
Thank you. Pablo Ortiz, Director of Innovation and Collaboration with the Journal of Concerned Scientists. I'm originally from Mexico, always been interested with the environment, with water. My undergraduate degree is from Mexico. I grew up there. My family is still there. Studied environmental engineering and then came to the United States a little bit more than 10 years ago for my PhD in hydrology and water resources management. And I've been with the Journal of Concerned Scientists for about 7 years now. And I'll pass it to Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you so much, Pablo. I appreciate it. And good afternoon and good evening to everyone. My name is Tracy Lewis. I am Senior Policy Counsel at Public Citizen, which is a think tank and advocacy org here in DC. But I live in Maryland. Eh. Um, my background is rooted in the law. I have my JD and I use it for good by working on public policy and regulatory matters, mostly centered around climate-related financial risk, but with the explosion of AI and data centers, Public Citizen writ large, and then on the climate energy team that I'm a part of, we saw the need to provide technical assistance to grassroots folks, and that's why I'm here to kind of talk about those needs, and I'm really looking forward to listening and learning as well as talking.
Thank you. So we'll start with just a brief sort of intro question, and if it's okay, we'll just continue to go into the order that you all introduced yourselves in, just to keep it simple. But just to start, what was it that first drew you into this conversation, this discussion around data centers and artificial intelligence? Was it something that came through your work, or was it something that came something more personal to you in the community that you live in? But Amy one, we'll start with you.
Sure. Okay, Amy one. I did not seek it out. It found me, whether I liked it or not. As I'm sure many of you who have been engaged in these site fights had no idea what was coming for you. So, I was working, my background's in public health. I did work on agriculture and nutrition and maternal and child health. So, I had that background, but in terms of this, what came upon us was basically I live in a rural area in a small community, and someone happened to notice a permit notice in the local paper, and nobody knew what it was, including the county commission. And that was a proposal for a 1,600 megawatt gas power plant with diesel backup, and then it was to power a hyperscale data center complex. So that kind of launched us on this journey, this unexpected journey. So we just started as a group of people, and now we have a bit more of a structure. We've kept kind of a coalition structure just to things move so quickly. We've made a lot of strategic decisions to not become a nonprofit just because anyone who's been involved in these type of fights, it's like a fire hose every day. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. But kind of the setting that we're in is it's a small town in the mountains of West Virginia. We have a very outdoor recreation based economy here. We have 3 ski resorts and state parks, and it's kind of revered as the gem of the state where all the lawmakers go to vacation. So it's a very odd choice. But we also have a lot of history of extractive industries, obviously, in the state, as well as our town used to be called Stumptown because it was really clear cut and there was a huge logging industry. There's mining. Yeah, so that's kind of how I got dragged in.
Thank you. Amy Adams.
I'll say it came to my doorstep as well. It was, I think, more than a year ago. Our senior membership manager, Abigail Franks, brought it to me. I believe it originated from Alabama Rivers Alliance, that there was a data center planned and there was some concern about the water. And I think I kind of, nodded. Another industry, of course, it's going to have water issues. And I think a little bit of more of her prompting, I started to dig in and look at these numbers, and started to get very concerned about just the water piece. And using my background being a regional water supervisor in Eastern North Carolina, where we had capacity use areas, raw water intakes, rural wastewater treatment plants. It started to unravel, much like Amy said. It's like every piece that you learn about, there are four more pieces to learn about, and it's just this ever evolving, ever growing issue with all of these side tangents and side issues and side concerns and parallel concerns. And we the Southeast Climate Energy Network covers 11 states in the South. And so this is something that we're seeing in multiple states. Multiple of our organizations are trying to fight this at a site by site level. And so, we see how quickly these things are popping up before we've had a chance to really study, before we've had a chance to get regulations in place. These things are just a juggernaut moving forward, and wanting to be able to step in and at least get us some really good questions. If we can't stop the juggernaut, can we at least be asking the right questions to make sure that our communities and our resources are protected? So I now live and breathe data centers, it feels like, several times a week. I read about them at night. I think I dream about them. The data centers are coming for everyone. And so I'm trying not to let this nightmare into a reality. And I'll stop there and I'll pass it on.
Yeah, I think many of us identify with that. No? This morning I was telling one of my friends, like, oh yes, I've been having data centers and AI for breakfast, lunch, and dinner pretty much for the last 2 years or something like that. No? I don't have a direct exposure to a data center being built near my community, but I have been working with climate change and hydrology for the past 10 years or so, mostly with farm worker communities in California. I'm located in California. And I know some data centers are coming now, big data centers, not hyperscale data centers are coming to some of these communities. At the same time, internally, due to my position at the Union of Concerned Scientists related to innovation and collaboration, it also came to me at some point. No, it was like, hey, Pablo, you work with innovation. We need an appropriate usage policy of artificial intelligence. Like, is it okay to use it? Is it not? And many people start asking me about it. And I didn't have enough answers at the beginning. So I need to inform myself, learn about not only the environmental implications, which is my main area of expertise, but also about ethical implications, other social and economic implications of this tool technology. It can have many different names. No? And it also came from a personal side of curiosity, as with many things that we use in a day-to-day is, I mean, that's why we are out here, no? It creates so many impacts to people, and especially for brown and Black communities for the most part. And I wanted to learn more, and I'm still learning. I think the topic changes so fast that that's why we need to be learning about it pretty much every day. And I was an early user of some of the technology, and then I was like, oh, this is having a lot of impacts, and I need to learn more to see if I can use it, and if I do, how to use it responsibly. And we can get a little bit more into that in the panel.
Thank you, Pablo. Tracy?
Yes, thank you so much, Khalil. I'm really enjoying hearing everyone's point of entry and knowing that I am part of a special crew of people who sadly dreams about data centers. Oh my God, I really thought it was just me. So thank you. I hope to see you guys in my dreams tonight, and we'll all band together like Avengers activate. So I work in DC, live in Maryland, and of late, even here in what's ostensibly a very progressive, very blue state, we have had an explosion of attempts to build out more data centers. seeing those NDAs signed by elected officials, in complete contravention to the very idea of an elected figure is responsible to their constituents, the people who put them in office. Well, you know what? They are, because the people who put them in office are the ones who are writing the checks. They're not the ones like you and I who show up on election day. I always go the first day of early voting, but like I'm that obsessed. But I'm hopeful like this evening's discussion, I can help reframe and help us all understand why we are where we are at this exact moment, who some of those key figures are, and how we can combat it. But that's the way my brain works. Um, Former journalist, now wayward attorney. Um, but I really enjoy looking at the regulatory side of this matter, the both at the state and federal level. And this is a time where we see how important states are when it comes to these things, and it's not just at this very high level at the executive or legislative or even federal judicial. This is really happening at the states, and so I am hopeful to work with uh, more grassroots groups who are right there on the ground and really understand their state, their local area and issues far more than those of us who work at the national level. Um, and it's a real opportunity for um, orgs like mine that are typically white led to not parachute in and start telling people whose lived experiences and lived pains and suffering are sadly far more informative than anything that I could tell them with my all my great research. So um, I come to this work in that vein of trying to address some historic wrongs done by national NGOs, and uh, hopeful to amplify not only the voices of the folks uh, at the grassroots levels, but to learn and adopt and adapt um, from the learnings that they offer uh, every day. So I find this a really enriching experience. It's tough. Like I don't know if anybody on here did that NAACP tour in DC where we went to Northern Virginia. I'd never seen a data center up close. It was the most dystopian thing I'd ever seen. It was like dozens of Borg ships had landed. I was just like literally waiting for like 7 to 9 to come out talking about, like whatever the Borg says. I forgot, but you all know what I mean. And saw one that was literally right next to a three field soccer field, and then right next to the soccer field was a line of pretty new looking townhomes that they were quite nice, and the shadow cast, the sound, like it's unbelievable that this has been allowed and foisted on people. So I'm here to fight back.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Tracy. Yes, they are absolutely Borg boxes. But it's very important as well because this is a unique civic moment for the environmental movement, where this thing or this issue is crossing so many lines, and has touched people's lives, in very direct, very tangible ways, and is awakening people, to this issue in a way that many other issues just have not. And so, this is, and the fact that, many of you said, this kind of came to you. You didn't go out seeking this, but, as a, community of NGOs and advocates, as communities on the ground, we've had to rise to the challenge because there are people, within these tech sectors who would like us to believe that resistance is futile, and that our skepticism and resistance to these data centers is somehow irrational. But what we're actually reacting to is the way that this stuff is being done. Behind closed doors, behind NDAs, without allowing us to challenge, to question, or to, shape, what this future that we're all supposed to be, walking into is supposed to look like. And so I really want to commend everyone, for taking the time to learn and to speak up and to stand up, for your communities. But so, we have a lot of questions coming in, and I think, we're just going to flow, continue to flow, through the conversation, and hopefully, we'll be able to answer some of those questions. But then again, we'll have opportunities, to dig more specifically into some of the other audience questions that are coming in as well. But first, let's give folks, that context of, because everyone is hearing about, how big and massive these facilities are, how much energy and water they use. Can you give us, some impression, what does that actually mean when we say that, that this facility is 1 gigawatt or 500 megawatts, or, what does that mean? How can you visualize that, for people? Or, if we say it's going to use 300,000, gallons of water, a day, what does that actually mean? And, you can go in any order, whoever wants to take that. And then added to that as well, what are the environmental risk and implications of that degree of resource consumption, in our communities? So we'd like to begin.
I could start if that's okay, and I may focus a little bit more on the water one. That's my expertise. However, taking just one step back, AI is a huge umbrella for many different things, no? And data centers are not something that are new. We have been having data centers in many areas for the past 30 years or so. What is new is these huge data centers, almost specifically for artificial intelligence, no? That this was the spread or the viral spread after the publication of ChatGPT, that 2022, if I remember right. So it's another era of data centers. So the question is the 300,000 gallons a day, how much is that? How can we put that in perspective, right? I work a lot with agriculture, and the way we measure the volume of water is in this interesting metric that is called acre feet, right? And what's an acre feet? Roughly, the size of an acre is a football field, and an acre feet, a measure of volume, is if you have the acre and you flood it by 1 feet, then that water that is there is an acre feet. 300,000 gallons a day is roughly one of those acre feet. So you can imagine in a year, if you put all of those together in a year, that would be 365 football fields flooded by a foot of water, right? Is that a lot of water, or is it not a lot of water? Well, it depends in many different things. It depends on where you are, and depends with what you compare it with. If you compare it with the water use by a community, a city, for example, it is definitely a lot of water, yes? You could potentially give, with one of this 1 acre feet is roughly the amount of water that 6,000 people use in a day. So for a year, you can multiply the 6,000 times 365, right? And then on the other side, that's like being in the data center water use and looking down. But you can also look up. So what uses way more water? agriculture. Agriculture uses order of magnitudes more water than data centers. So it has many different caveats on that. For example, again, I'm in California, no? So um, multiplying the amount of water from this particular, a mid-sized data center, not 300,000 gallons of water, that's roughly 400 acre feet a year. And that's roughly the amount of water that would be used to irrigate 80 acres of almonds. In California, we have millions of acres of almonds. So again, if it's a lot of water, depends if you are looking down or if you are looking up, or the specific conditions of your community. If your community is already struggling with water and having water scarcity, then you definitely want to check at any addition of water extractions that are happening locally. I have more, but I think Amy is also an expert on water, so I want to pass it to Amy as well. Amy,
Thanks for that. You're definitely more of an expert on water than I am. I was just going to say that, this question is really a core challenge for anyone who's involved in what people are calling site fights, because, even when you say data center, like data center, when our local county officials talk about a data center, they say, oh, we already have a data center. And it's, the size of a gym and it has no power generation attached to it. So I think one thing that people struggle with is like, what are we talking about? And even when we talk to the media is saying data center as a singular. Like we're not, at least in our particular site fight, what we're fighting against is a power plant and a hyperscale complex. And so people just cannot wrap their mind around that scale wise. And it has been something we've been struggling with for a year, and the best way to communicate. And what we've tried to really do is use local references to try and express to people what it means. And even when we do that, people tend not to believe us. But we have, like, for example, when people in DC turn on their AC, our power plant right at the edge, right over our county line between Tucker and Grant counties, there's a coal-fired power plant called Mount Storm that's about 1,600 megawatts. And it will start billowing out smoke. And that's about the same size as the gas plant that would be a mile from our elementary school and next to our two towns of like 600 people. So when you say this is not, a data center, it's not a box, it's like Mount Storm plus somewhere between, we don't know how many, maybe 10, maybe 150 mega-sized Walmarts attached to it, going all the way out on the highway. And so I think you have to kind of paint like an illustrative picture for people, because, even in these metrics that, to folks who really understand it, they can grasp that. I think it's just the variety and scale and the variety and designs of what these projects are makes it actually very hard to even create coalitions with folks who are in the same sort of fights, because each site is so different. And like you said, the particular resources of that area are going to affect the impacts, both in terms of health impacts, environmental impacts, questions of equity. Like it really depends a lot on the site and the design of what type of facility are we talking about. So I do just want to add a little bit of nuance there. Because sometimes I'll talk to people and they really are just fighting one. And I'm like, wow, that's great. You're lucky. And then there's also all this bubble talk around everything else, which is the company that is proposing these type of facilities often want to talk up how big their facility is going to be. And there's no way to know the actual scale. In our case, they said it could be up to 10,000 acres. Now, we have no way to verify that because everything is redacted. We can't even tell the stack height for the power plant. And, so it's a very awkward position in terms of, having an advocacy role and working with the community, because the community doesn't know basic information. And then the company can say, you won't be able to see the smokestacks from town. And you're saying, okay, well, you're telling me the pollution will disperse over our heads, but we also can't see the smokestacks. And I know the trees are 50 feet tall. So something doesn't add up. And so I think that creates a little bit of a challenge from like a communication standpoint from those of us who are confronting this, is we don't even know you have the scale, and then you also have the size and the power source, and that can be different in each context.
To bring us back around a little bit to the health component of this is when you do talk about specific communities and you get to a site-by-site analysis of what is happening, there are areas that we see data centers going into where they are either looking at raw water intakes and or they're looking at groundwater capacity. And there are already, we have seen with the growth of cities, with the growth of suburban areas, that cities are already trying to struggle. They're already adding new raw water intakes to meet their current water demands. And our rivers can only handle so much withdrawal. We've already seen this on a larger scale and regional scale that raw water intakes are reducing the flow, the 7-day flows for rivers that sustains the life in the river. And while 80% of water use is evaporated, that means there's 20% usually going into a local wastewater treatment system. And what we see in lots of rural areas is failing wastewater treatment systems already. Now they're having to add this additional wastewater that they're not prepared for. That overwhelms that system as well. So we talk about there's a balance here of what industry needs and what community needs to be able to depend on. This is throwing their, and most communities have a projected growth rate. This is throwing those growth rates off. One of the ways that I try to describe it is I live in a town of about 10,000 people. We are the largest city in my county. A data center coming to us would be like adding the largest city in the county with all the water and electricity needs of that city, but only 10 jobs. And asking folks, would you be able to accommodate building the largest city in this county within just a couple of years and providing what it needs when you can't figure out how to provide for what we have currently in the projected growth? I also want to mention that when we talk about water, there's kind of three big categories of water. There's the on-site water use. Then there's the indirect water use, which is the electricity. How did it take? Of course, if it was energy came from fossil fuels, it takes a lot more water to then get that energy as well. And then the only kind of third piece in here is it takes a lot of water, and those chips have to have a specialized ultra pure water for their rinsing. And there's a lot of loss. Like I think it takes like 2,000 gallons of water to get 1,000 gallons of ultra pure water. So there's sort of three big categories that are all piling on to what does data center water use mean. And so I'll pause there. Tracy, you got any other thoughts for us?
My thoughts are OMG, because it really is quite staggering. That's my technical contribution to this conversation, because it is really quite overwhelming, which explains why people are caught so flat-footed, because you're like, you can understand a school being built or a fire station, right? Like those are, when you live somewhere, whether rural or urban, your mind can grasp that. I mean, I live in an apartment building. I don't think about how many gallons of water that everybody uses, but when I get my bill, I'm like, because it's split amongst the entire building of like 300 people. I'm like, everybody's using that much water? But yes. And then to scale that up is really quite insane. So I lean on all of you scientists to help lay people like me understand the scale. Because the other part, just really quickly, is you find that politicians, right, are intimately involved in this. I don't think that they even understand what it is they are signing away our rights and our future to. They're in these hushed back rooms, and signing away our rights without even knowing, like, what does it mean to deplete the groundwater? I used to think that groundwater was refilled by like a really good rain. I didn't know that it took like hundreds of years to have a groundwater system, and how they could destroy that in a short time. And then what? Where do you live when you have no water? What's Grok going to tell me then? That's what I want to know. But back to you.
Yeah, thank you all for that. Kathy here, one of our participants in the chat asked about, do we need the infrastructure? And the quick answer I would say to that is that, and as Pablo mentioned as well, there are different types of data centers, and data centers, we've had them for many years, and there is a deliberate attempt to create this ambiguity about what's happening about data centers and about AI and why this period is so different. And part of it is so that, we can feel this sort of shared complicity in what's happening. So, if you like using, internet, if you like doing webinars, if you like, streaming videos, then, you're a part of this too. But it's not the same thing. And even when it comes to AI, you can have a language model that can help you synthesize medicines to cure cancer. You don't need that same language model to give you a casserole recipe. When you try to combine it all into one thing, that scaling is what creates this massive need for energy and for resources. It's when you try to create these large language models, when you try to create AGI that can do everything, this general purpose machine that creates the need for this higher resource demand. And just on the energy side specifically, I always like, because, and I can't remember where I read this comparison, but a 1 gigawatt data center, which is the some of the largest, the hyperscale, the Meta facility in Louisiana, for example, is going to be 2 gigawatts. But a 1 gigawatt data center, if you were to try to power that data center completely with renewable energy, it would require 12.5 million solar panels, which will cover about 5,000 football fields. So that's the scale, that we're talking about. A 400 megawatt data center plant would require about 250 acres of solar panels, enough land to cover 4 square miles. So that's the scale of resource consumption that we're talking about, with these facilities. And so, we need to be able to ask, the right questions, what it is that we need this technology for, what is it that we're expecting to get out, and what's the actual cost? And, is this going to force us to embed pollution and emissions in our communities, to have technology that allows us to, make videos of dancing clowns, who knows? But to I can't, I think it was Amy's point, or maybe it was Tracy's point, talking about a lot of our local officials, who aren't really understanding what it is that they're signing up to, because too often local officials, these data centers are just real estate deals. And they're not thinking about the larger ramifications of it. They're not thinking about what the digital economy actually is and how you can actually create one, from a space of equity, from a space of justice, if it's possible to do that, and what that would actually look like. And it would not look like leading with hyperscale data centers. It would look very different, if you were going to do that. And so to get back, sorry to take us a little bit off course, but to come back into a bit more in this conversation about the environmental impacts, can you all, tell us a little bit about, what are the different sources of environmental pollutants, from that people should be concerned about, from the operation of a data center. We talked about, the water needed for cooling, and what happens there. But we've also heard a lot about the natural gas and the diesel generators that are, in many cases supposed to be used for backup, oftentimes are used, when they, don't have secure grid connections, and so they're actually running them a lot more. And so, can you all speak a little bit more about, what are the different types of environmental and really quality of life when you think about noise pollutions and some of the other issues, as well?
Sure, I can start if you want, or Amy Adams. I saw you. Yeah. Okay. I'll try to list the five that comes to mind: light, noise, air pollution, water. In some cases, sometimes they add additives to the water that they use, and then pollution, maybe not on site, but that is generated from the electricity sources. No, there are some reports from lights. Why they want to keep a lot of lighting even at night is because the data that some of these data centers hold is very important, and they want to have very big security in the data centers. Noise is like a constant humming noise, 24/7, and this is coming from the ventilators, cooling systems that they have that are mostly on the roofs, and that just produce that constant humming. And this is an issue particularly important for noise sensitive people. Like not everyone minds a little humming. No? Some people appreciate a little bit of white noise, but some people are very sensitive to this type of constant noises. Also, because if they are close enough to the data center, they report feeling the vibrations sometimes in their windows and things like that. So it's not only the noise, but also that vibration sensation. Emissions directly from data centers, as you were already saying, Khalil, some data centers, not all of them, but some have the diesel generators as backups. And even if they are just as backup, they need to turn it on every certain period of time to test them, to make sure that they are going to be working the way they are supposed to work when they need them. And sometimes they need to turn them on in the order of hours. And that can generate a lot of air pollution, affecting most of the nearby communities, right? And the other one is also air pollution, but then coming from the electricity power generation plants that are feeding some of these data centers. That's not considering some of the potential impacts during the construction of data centers, and not considering some of the other public health consequences just from producing the chips, and all the materials like the cement, steel that goes into data centers, and also on the components for the GPUs, the graphical processing units.
Yeah, thanks. I'll jump in here. I think you kind of covered all the broad categories. I would just say from our site, for example, from this proposed power plant, it has 30 million gallons of diesel stored on site. For what reason, we don't really know. But I had to look up to try and see what that was comparable to because I really couldn't find any other facility that had that large storage. And apparently it's kind of comparable to BWI Airport's diesel use in a year. So it's a little hard to wrap your mind around it again. And this would be at the head of the Pendleton Creek, which is the watershed that goes into Blackwater Falls area, Pendleton Lake, goes all the way down the watershed up to Kingwood. So just the diesel in itself, in our situation, just a diesel spill could be a huge problem all the way down the watershed, every single community down there in terms of water quality and all of those issues. In terms of the air pollution, certainly for a gas plant, there are air pollution concerns. In our case, we kind of have a unique topography where we are. We're in a mountain valley, so it's kind of like a bowl. And if folks are familiar with actually, I learned that the reason the National Air Quality Standards were created was due to a tragedy that happened in Donora, Pennsylvania, where a similar temperature inversion happened and basically pollutants were concentrated and people died and were made very ill. And we have a similar topography. We have very unusual climatological conditions where we are. And that's something we brought up multiple times to the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection and said, look, it's not just the proximity to, it's not just that it's 1.4 miles from our elementary school and right next to two towns. It's also that Canaan Valley is a bowl And so we are very concerned that the pollutants will just sit in the bowl. And from my own experience living here, what happens when we have wildfires in Canada is that it smells like burning plastic because it just sits in the bowl. And again, this is a place where people are, all DC folks are doing their skiing vacations, and that's going to impact, for example, not just the health of everyone who lives there, but also the economy, because we rely on that tourism for a large part of our small economy. And we had requested this kind of, dispersion modeling from the DEP. They said they were not under the obligation to do so. So we raised money and did our own study. We contracted with some researchers at Harvard. And they were able to generate a report using EPA models to show, this plant, not even the data center complex, just the plant to power the complex could cause $19 to $35 million in associated healthcare costs. And so that is really concerning, and not just to our community, but because of the location, it disperses, right? So it's not just a concern to our little community. It goes, pollution knows no boundaries. So it goes into Grant County, and it actually goes all the way over to Maryland and Virginia and other counties. And so I think, there are just so many, like you said, there's so many elements to this that are concerning. And I think being able to get that information out there, and help people to understand what costs, in terms of health costs, environmental costs that local communities will take on. It's important to weigh that with the subsidies that are being given to industry and say, is this really worth it? Because what our local officials are being told is they're going to take in all this revenue, um, from the taxation. And so I think it's very important to build that evidence base as well, for groups to say, okay, if we can fundraise, like let's pay, get some researchers to get out there and generate the data, because I know people need that information to show the potential impacts for their community, and particularly in areas that have vulnerable communities, lower income communities where we have a lot of elderly children. There's a nursing home, West Virginia, a lot of issues with black lung, high rates of asthma. And so it is a real concern on how it impacts our community.
Thanks, all. Yeah, Pablo, I think you did a great job setting us up with those kind of five areas. I will say that I want to bring to this that it is not like when we talk about the noise and the light and the discharges, that this is happening in a vacuum. It's not like these are getting cited in areas that were, clean already. What they love to do is find areas that have already been impacted. And so adding 30 diesel generators, I can say it in a minute, in an already air polluted community is just adding harm on top of harm. And so one of the things that we need to talk about is where they're going. And they're not going into a vacuum. They are going into areas that have already experienced disinvestment. They've already experienced pollution. The same story. I mean, we know this story. We've seen it a lot. It happens. And I want to add on to the other piece that Pablo said about the upstream generation for where the power is coming from. What we've seen in a lot of southern states is commitments to increase natural gas and to not retire coal plants in order to meet this demand. And so if you kind of add all of this together, we're keeping dirty coal, we're bringing in new dirty unnatural gas, and then we're also siting it in locations that are already exposed and have been exposed for years. And it is a compounding problem. It is not as if this AI data center is coming in a vacuum. It is coming into a systemic pattern of polluted communities and disinvestment and disenfranchisement for communities. So they're not happening in a vacuum, but in a broader system of systemic oppression. So I'll end it on that.
And if I can just add, thank you all for those insights. Um, to me, one of the most absurd and mind-numbingly disgusting plans for uh, fueling these data centers um, is, of course, using dirty coal. I'm saying it here today. I'm embracing it. Coal is not clean. Um, but but also we're seeing um, the reviving of shuttered coal plants to fire up Bitcoin mining. Just wanted to add that on here, which is so patently absurd and so enraging. That's happening here in Maryland. There's a coal plant on the Potomac that's been closed for about 4 years, and finally cleaning up the Potomac in that area that has historically been, polluted. And here they're trying to reopen it so that they can fuel a Bitcoin mine. And of course, right, you're like, a Bitcoin mine. Who does that benefit? Who owns Bitcoin? Can I buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin? Can I pay my mortgage with it? I won't live long enough because if I don't have lung cancer or some other horrible disease because I'm living around a revived coal plant so that somebody can get some Bitcoin is the biggest bunch of hooey. I'm being nice because this is recorded. Um, but it's really the patent absurdity of all of this, right? Because Elon Musk, right, built unlawfully, I might add, his XAI center in Memphis, in one of the blackest cities in America, where the health department signed off on it, said, "Oh, there's no methane." Of course, we see in those contrast photos that it's pumping out methane 24/7. Um, so the very very idea of the kind of collusion again from people who are entrusted with public health, public safety, our financial health, they have thrown it all to the wind. And for what? So that Grok can undress women without consent to create criminal videos. It is it is so far beyond disgusting. I used to think that, living in Pottersville, like from It's a Wonderful Life, was the worst thing in the world. No, it's what we're living in right now.
Thank you all. I want to start to take a couple of questions because I think that they're relevant to where we are in this part of the conversation from our audience in the chat. And so, one comes from Jessica Thomas, who is asking, and this is a huge question that comes up with these facilities. But we're hearing a lot about closed loop cooling, as if this is going to solve the water consumption issues. Can one of you give us a quick background on what do they actually mean by closed loop, and does that actually you know, save on water consumption the way it's promised?
I can take it, but also happy to step back
That's
and
good.
having somewhere
I was
started
going to
this
say
one.
either you or Amy, Paula.
Yeah, we seem to be just going in the same order. So I will say from my understanding of closed loop, and Pablo, you can please interrupt me and jump in. But it is a trade-off for energy that you may reduce your water use by keeping it in a closed loop system. But because keeping it in a closed loop system, this water is superheated. It's not like the closed loop system in your car. It's not like it gets, 200 and some degree. This is superheated water. And so to be able to cool it down in the time that it needs, you would then have to have external chillers. And so now you're increasing your energy use. So while it can reduce the water, you're trading off for increased energy. I also am not sure, and probably maybe like, can that at some point does that water have to be changed out. And when it does, when it's released, we know from a reverse osmosis system, when you backflush salt water out into a brackish system or a fresh system and overnight change it brackish, you kill everything off in the creek. Is this something that we're going to have some sort of discharge at some point, and can either the creeks or the wastewater treatment plants handle whatever the heck is in that water? Because we're also getting a hard time with, because of NDAs, finding out exactly what it is that they may be using on site. Pablo, please fill in if I've missed something.
That was great. The only thing that I would add is that's one of the ways of cooling data centers, no? And there are some new technologies that use close to no water, at least in theory. And this is what is called liquid cooling. So a lot of the issues with like computers or cell phones, when we use them, they generate the heat, no? And then they need to cool down. And in these liquid cooling systems, well, in the regular systems, then that hot air is just pretty much going to the whole room, and they need to cool that. In the liquid cooling, it's like the coils of liquid are directly placed on top of the chips to prevent them to release a lot of the heat into the rest of the room. And these are very efficient. Again, like you say, Amy, it has other potential issues, no? Like the energy consumption of the systems, that they now, instead of requiring water, they're requiring other types of electricity to bring the liquid, whatever they are using, to keep it cool again, bring it to be chilled. And my understanding, hopefully if someone is interested in this particular point, they can search more, because I don't have the exact data, no? But my understanding is that some of these liquids, because of the technology that they use, they have PFAS integrated, no? The forever chemical type of things. So definitely a risk and a worry of what happens with that water after, no? It will certainly need to be treated in a specific way that some of the current water treatment plants don't have that capacity.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct on the risk of PFAS contamination, especially for those systems where the water does directly touch the chips, because the chips are all coated, or typically coated with PFAS as a protectant. But again, as Amy said, due to a lot of the NDAs that are being used, where they're claiming, proprietary information, we're oftentimes not able to actually get accurate information, both about what type of technology they're actually using in these cases, and what may be on the chips, and what types of coating, what type of chemicals, may be involved in those processes. And the major thing as well, when they say closed loop, a closed loop is not a fully closed loop, because there still is evaporation, from that loop, as well as Amy said, eventually, you will have to discharge it once you use the water so much, and it will have to go through wastewater treatment, which is where, again, those other risks will come into play. And the last thing I will say on that as well, and this goes back again to Pablo's very first comment about understanding the distinction between these sort of previous generation of data center and these hyperscale data centers, because a lot of times when we hear about these sustainability solutions like closed loop cooling, or whatever have you, a lot of those ideas were piloted on much smaller data centers. And when you get up to the scale of the hyperscale data center, those sustainability solutions break down. And it's very hard to scale those things up, to have the same type of impact when you're talking about something at such a massive scale as this. So, we wanted to close out this section just to give, if there's any more thought about, just the environmental health risks, both from the data centers themselves, but just one other statistic I'll throw out at you. we do know, for example, natural gas, is also seeing a resurgence due to these data centers, natural gas generators. There was a segment on NPR Marketplace just a day ago that talked about Caterpillar, the big tractor company, is selling these huge generators because they build, big machines that use big engines. So they're used to creating these things, but they're starting to sell these big engines to data centers, to use diesel fuel and natural gas, to be able to power these facilities. But in addition to that, the oil and gas industry is preparing for a potential boom. They are expecting an additional trillion barrels of oil to be made available from the use of AI to help them to search and find, new oil deposits around the world. And so we're risking much, much wider health and climate impacts just from the embedded emissions of using it and expanding this technology. And so, as much as we hear about, this technology will help us solve climate change, or to help us cure cancer, or to help your kid read, or to help you do all these positive things, well, the oil and gas industry is also preparing, and they're actually using it, to help them find, new and deeper oil and gas deposits. And so, for every potential good that's unproven, we have, major corporations are investing in these resources, to be able to keep the fossil fuel life cycle alive even further. So, but just wanted to pass it back to you all, just for any final thought, just on just the overall health, public health risk from either the operation of the data centers or thinking about AI much more broadly and what we should be concerned about.
Yeah, let me just maybe add something that I think comes into play as well with these concerns is really kind of, as we're in this context where federal regulations are kind of being rolled back every day. Maybe we'll get to that later, so I won't dip into that too much. But in terms of on a state level, there are these state regulatory structures and processes, and I think those regulatory processes and requirements, and even the capacity of the state level environmental protection agency, I think plays a big role in this, just in terms of enforcement. Because I think when we started going through this process, I had this naive idea about what the Department of Environmental Protection did, or how they framed themselves. And, they do the permitting. And so as we went through the air quality permit process for the power plant, we started asking more questions about, how many of these permits have you typically deny? And the answer was none. And then we asked them, so for this plant, what are the reporting requirements? And they said, oh, it's self-reporting. We said, okay, that's a little concerning. So how often will you have your inspectors come and visit the plant? And they said, well, we're pretty limited in current capacity, so probably about once every 2 years. And we said, okay, so if there's a violation for this gas plant that's powering this giant data center complex, how will the public know? Because we live right next to it, my kid's school's right there. I coach a soccer team right there. And they said, oh, you can check our website. And we said, wait, are you going to send out an alert? No, you can check our website apparently every day to see if you're being exposed to pollutants. So I think, you start to go through this process where you realize that you can't trust the enforcement. And so I think it really falls to the public to do a lot of this. And, we, for example, immediately started putting up these purple air monitors to be like, okay, well, we need to establish a baseline because we didn't, in the state, I think there was less than 5 in the state. And we're a huge energy generation state. We have, 86% of our electricity generation comes from coal. So air quality is a big issue, and there just is not enough capacity at the state level to monitor this stuff. And so we started to do that. And, at the same time, we start seeing that there are bills that have been pushed every year to basically say that community air monitoring is not valid, and that anything, basically any community type of environmental monitoring is not valid. And so this effort to kind of push the public out of the process, is really concerning, and maybe we'll get to it later with some of the state level bills that we've been dealing with. But when you frame it in this question of like this is a industrial buildup, and this is what our state wants. This is the answer to the question of what to do with the supply. And so I think there's a huge promotion in some states, not every state, but our governor is pushing a 50 by 50 plan, which says we want to go from 15 gigawatts to 50 gigawatts by 2050. And so it's just a tremendous push to increase the number of gas plants, to prop up coal plants. And, so I think that's been the history of the state. And so it is challenging because in many contexts, you have this pressure, these economic pressures where you have our local coal plant is closing and there are 200 people going to be out of work. So, you have to balance saying, how can we think about smart economic development that is not going to, ruin people's communities? And I think it's a delicate balance in some contexts, because local officials really want to generate new jobs. They need the money, uh, but there just aren't many jobs. So I think it's this, yeah, it's very much been a push at the state level to make this happen, no matter what communities think about it.
Can I just tease out what Amy really just highlighted so clearly for us on that jobs front? It is a fraud perpetrated on citizens to say that data centers bring jobs. Yes, it must be constructed, and that may take, a couple hundred people. But once it's built, the number of jobs are in the handful, not even 100. It might be 2 dozen. Now, and then and of course, it is not just the lack of actual good paying jobs, but then it's accompanied by massive tax breaks. And I'm still trying to figure out why are we giving them tax breaks when they aren't bringing anything except death and destruction? I know I keep saying it, it is so perverse. It is offensive to the mind, body, and soul for uh, uh, local and state officials to come out after they've been outed for hiding the data center build outs under um, a maze of LLC names that you can't find out who's behind it, who to talk to because your electeds have signed NDAs, which really I think should be unlawful. And so, what do they have to hang their hats on when you suddenly discover that there's been a conspiracy against the American people to put these any and everywhere to destroy our water and our air. And and again, for what? I mean, I still have my iPhone, my 12, and I'm going to use this thing until it kicks the bucket. I don't need the latest and greatest. We all used to not have cell phones. We can make it, America. We can do this. But what we have now in this situation is a complete rejection of science, of medicine, of the law, of common decency and humanity. So it's going to take more than just like, how do we fight this one data center? We are seeing a full-scale attack on all the things that make us distinctly human.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And so can we talk a little bit about, what are the, because we obviously know that, we're not getting much protection, much help from the federal level. And so at the state level, at the local level, what are the existing environmental regulations that should be leveraged in this case? Who should people be, looking to, like, who has responsibility for, this enforcement, the permitting at the local level, and what are the appropriate environmental standards that people should be, raising questions about at the local level?
I will just say that it's a little bit of a red state, blue state issue here now because for folks who live in red states, there's been a complete capitulation to the fossil fuel industry, the abdication of environmental laws and structures. And you know, I I feel especially for people there, and I really dislike people like, oh, red states, that's you voted for, that's what you wanted. Like, no. There are millions of people who did not vote for that. I don't think that they should suffer because a handful of mountebanks and Visigoths uh, took over their government. Um, and I do like using the words mountebanks and Visigoths. Feel free to sprinkle it freely in your vocabulary. It's always good. Um, but um, uh, and also it's not that blue states are necessarily doing better. Like I said, here in Maryland, Governor Moore is receptive to um, these data centers versus Jersey or Virginia. So it's a real challenge across the board. People who live in the urban areas, exurban, suburbs, rural, um, we are all impacted in some way. And it really it takes this kind of mass organizing, and it's mass organizing that's going across a spectrum, right? There places where they haven't been built, but there's a
Hmm.
discussion to that they're built. Now what do we do? And everything in between. And I don't know if folks saw last night, there's a guy who showed up at a town hall to speak. He had 3 minutes, and 3 minutes and 1 second, he was arrested because they said it's a trespass to stay there beyond your 3 allotted minutes. So there's a real concerted authoritarian, totalitarian effort to crush the people. And we have to use a variety of methods to fight back against that.
Hmm. Something I wanted to add is that we focus a lot on water, no? Maybe some of us are biased towards water, but as a water expert, in general terms, no? If you look at the local level, it will probably change in some cases. But in the larger scale of things, I'm more concerned about the energy side of things that you were bringing out, Khalil. And also in terms of the environment, no? Because other bigger concerns to me are related to labor, to the potential for disinformation and misinformation, and this other type of topics. But some questions for people to ask at the local level if there are proposals for data centers in the communities, no? For example, what was there before? Or what are other alternatives, if there are any other alternatives? And this is because sometimes when fighting a data center, what can happen is that data center just gets built somewhere else where the community was not as well organized. And in many cases is communities, low-income communities that don't have that capacity of organizing in some cases, no? So
Yes.
really interesting questions of like, well, it's not built here, but will it be built somewhere else, and what are the implications? So really looking sometimes, again, at the local level, and this is for the community to decide, no? But looking at community benefit agreements, like what can be legally binding agreements from the proponents of data centers, that would materialize some of the benefits or reduce the impacts, particularly when the construction, for whatever reason, cannot be stopped, for example.
Mhm. Yeah. Can I just and just really quickly on the tax issue. So and again, this the rise of this data center resistance, it is definitely having an effect. It's having an electoral effect. We saw it in the recent elections outcomes this past fall. But we now know that at least 14 states are considering withdrawing their tax incentives for data centers at the state level. And I think in all there are at least 27 different pieces of legislation going through those 14 states. And so some states have multiple pieces of legislation targeting, withdrawing these tax breaks. And a couple of those states, are going to withdraw them, but make them conditional that these data centers, have to meet certain standards. So, paying for, any, environmental harms or, cleanup costs, et cetera. But those are the types of questions, and those are the types of demands that people should be making at the local level through these permitting processes. We should be using something that is called conditional use permitting, which means that before any permit is granted, that it is conditional on them agreeing to and showing how they plan to meet certain standards, to protect our communities from harm, and also to make sure that we are maximizing whatever benefits that come from the presence of that facility in our communities. Okay, so let's continue to move on. I'll try to look for other questions in the
Can I just,
chat. Yes, go ahead.
sorry,
Sorry.
can I just add to that, and not to be the voice of doom in the room, but we're kind of in the, I mean, it's great to highlight some of the positive developments, and I think that's great. I think in our state context, we're just in a very different situation where we have legislation that was passed at the state level that specifically removes all local control. So basically, and they advertise it on the Department of Commerce advertises it on their website as a benefit to companies that come, that they have preempted any local community opposition. So basically, we can't zone it. We can't do anything once it's certified as a microgrid. So I think there is this kind of burgeoning conversation about, okay, we're worried about the grid being overloaded. What about if everyone brings your own new generation? And so West Virginia is kind of already there. That's their approach, was we're just going to start and have, each hyperscale complex have their own generation. They're not going to be on the grid. So we can kind of, it allows them to kind of avoid that trap in a way. But what happens is the way they've created the law and the taxation structures is that local communities have no say. And even in the processes where in theory we do, for example, in the air quality permitting, we had 1,600 comments submitted on our air quality permit for this facility, and they maybe made 10 small changes to the permit. It was issued, we appealed it, we had to get into this process. And again, we have an air quality board that most of them are appointed by the governor. So, I think it becomes concerning. I think Tracy was bringing this up, that there's kind of this preemption of democratic processes, which is all of these processes were created for the public to be engaged, and these regulations were created for the public to be engaged. They were created to protect the public. And so if you exclude the public from those processes, you will never get that input that gives you the information of whether or not this is a good site. And so I think it actually very much is to the interest of the state to include communities, because in the end, and we've talked to some of these folks who are screening the applicants at the state level, and they say, we're getting terrible proposals. It's like a race to the bottom. We're getting really bad, not feasible business proposals because it's basically this gold rush. And it's hard for them to screen out the good ones or the better ones. And because the public has no way to be involved, we can't contribute that information to say, hey, let's sit around and ask some questions and say, why are you putting it on top of like a premier tourist economy in the state? Or like, why is it at the head, at the headwaters of the watershed? So I think, it's really a disservice to what they think is their economic development plan, which is you don't want to bring in the worst actors, and I think when a lot of people say, oh, we're facing Meta, we're facing Google, like we're not facing those type of people. We're facing Bitcoin, we're facing crypto, because we're creating a structure where we invite in those actors who aren't concerned about sustainability. They're not concerned about any of those metrics. They're just trying to move as quickly as possible in this rush. And so I think that that is concerning to local communities, and they're trying to catch up to it, but they can't participate. And then our taxation structure diverts 70% of the property tax to Charleston. So basically, they're centralizing power as well. So they're taking what would have been a lot of funds going to our local services, our schools. It now goes to Charleston, and they get to decide what to do with it. And they're using it to reduce the personal income tax, which is, of course, for people who earn a lot of personal income, which is not a lot of people in the state of West Virginia. So it's a really concerning, pattern. And then there are new bills coming in this legislative session that further reduce the potential tax revenue. And so basically, we've even had policy analyses showing that we will probably, as a state, make no money from this, which is really mind-boggling, because what is the point of this if not for the money? Like, there is no other argument there that is really appealing to anyone other than like, okay, the only reason people are spreading out the red carpet is because they think they're going to get millions of dollars in tax revenue. Now, if you throw that out the door with incentives and subsidies and divert it away from communities, I can't really understand what the appeal is. We're going to destroy our health, our environment. We haven't even talked about burdening local services. I mean, a lot of these, at least in small rural communities, we have volunteer firefighters. We have, already overburdened emergency services because we handle a lot of tourists as well. And so I think there's not a very thoughtful process, and when the public is excluded, it makes it worse. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And yeah, I did not mean to gloss over the
No,
fact
sorry to
that
be a bummer, but yeah.
no, absolutely. No, it's, we have to know where we are in order to get where we want to go. So, because otherwise, yeah, we can't get there from here. But so yeah, and you're absolutely right. Like, and I think West Virginia is one state. I think Mississippi is another state that they have like one of the worst laws that just give just carte blanche to the utilities to permit, access to the grid, and even the state regulator cannot. They have no right to block, to question, anything in that process, and a lot of that was done specifically for Amazon, who's investing heavily into the state of Mississippi, and so there are those states that are on the opposite side of the spectrum that are really showing what it looks like to go just hog wild in the other direction with some of this. Okay, so trying to continue because we have some really good audience questions. We're getting a lot of questions, from the audience, specifically around noise pollution. How to how to track it, but then also, what can be done, in terms of, buffers, but, other, and similarly so, like, what are the sort of regulatory options, at the local level, for dealing with that ongoing silent hum that comes with having to live near one of these facilities.
It's complex. I can say the little I know, but by no means is my area of expertise. And this is from some testimonies that I saw on videos, no, people that live close to data centers, and then they ask their experience. One of them was using a device to measure the decibels that comes at his home. I think he was located somewhere around 350 meters from the data center. No, he's the one that was telling about the constant humming and sometimes the vibrations, to the point that at some point he was like, I cannot bear with this. And they had an underground room, and him and his family were sleeping there for some time to reduce the noise and all that. They did brought this to the data center. There were some aspects that happened, and what they did was putting some sort of covers in the ventilators of the data centers that helped. At first, it reduced it a lot. It reduced it a little, not a lot, and they ended up, I think, changing the ventilators themselves to less noise ventilators. Apparently, that helped, but again, for sensitive, for people sensitive to noise, it was not enough. Helping, but not enough. Now, we always talk about people, but it's also the ecosystems, no, that get affected by a lot of the noise that happen there, whether it's spiders. I have a good friend that did a whole PhD on how the noise affects the spiders, no, for their prey and things like that. Super interesting. Birds, that maybe their songs are muted by the constant humming of data centers and they cannot communicate very well. And other aspects like that. But I saw Amy coming up mute, and I'm sure more to add.
Oh, I was the little bit about the noise because it's very hard, at least for me. We talked about, imagine a football field. I have a hard time imagining that. When people say, oh, well, it's about 60 decibels, I don't know what that means. How loud is a rock concert? And so the 60 decibels, when we talk about a hum, it really isn't about the volume of the sound. It's the fact that it never, ever stops. So, one thing I tell folks is if you want to get a feel for this, go put a leaf blower in your neighbor's yard and just leave it running for a week and see how you feel about that leaf blower at the end of the week. Like you're going to feel a little different about day two. It is the constant, it is the fact that there's no break from it. I've heard the argument, but we all love white noise asleep. It's a hum. You turn your white noise off. You are able to get away from it. That is your choice. And the standard go-to answer for light and for sound is vegetative buffers. And so, yeah, that does a little, but that doesn't just hiding it behind a bunch of trees does not make the problem go away. And that seems to be the sort of standard answer for, oh, if it's too bright or too loud, let's just plant a bunch of vegetative cover around it, problem solved. Also trying to think through setbacks. You'll see all of these range of setbacks, 50 feet, 250 feet. For one, it's very difficult for me to judge what 50 feet is. I have to think about, well, this room is only 12. So is that enough? And most communities don't know. They haven't done a noise study. There isn't an ambient noise background to know, what is the background noise? This is cumulative adding to traffic noise, airport noise. Like, where is this thing being located? Instead of just adding to a cumulative impact on the community. So I just wanted to add a little bit about noise to give you sort of a feel for what does that mean? Again, go set a leaf blower at the neighbor's house and just let it go and see how long before you're really mad at it.
That's great because actually it reminds me of one of our early community meetings. One of the members of our coalition brought her blender and she tested to see how loud it was, and then she went in the nearby room and just ran the blender while we were trying to do our presentation, and very effective. It's much louder than you think it is. And I think, like you said, that hum, I think there's been some definitely documented cases of just, dogs losing their hair and, animal migration patterns changing. And, there's a lot of impacts there with noise. I think from a kind of, community standpoint, how to deal with that, we've already looked into that angle. We can't do anything about it basically because of the various, our context, but I know from spending a lot of time going down one of 5 million rabbit holes, there are places where you might have home rule, in your local municipality, or you might have local zoning. We have zoning regulations in Canaan Valley. We do not have them in our towns. Even if we did, it wouldn't matter, but there are a lot of rural places where you don't have any zoning because people don't like it, because they want to have freedom to do what they want with their property. And so I think in areas where you do have zoning or you have a home rule designation and you can, work with your local officials and work on a buffer, or you could, some there are some wins that have happened from a legislative standpoint, in terms of nuisance cases related to noise. They're not necessarily related to data centers, but I think there is, there's something there. Surprisingly to me, that would have been kind of the last thing I would be assuming would be fruitful, but from a legal standpoint, there is some history there in terms of both viewshed issues and nuisance. So I know folks are looking for different angles. You could check there.
A quick
Yes,
follow-up question to that. I'm sorry, Pablo, but just staying on the noise pollution and the effects. So we have, one additional question from one of our audience members, Sue, who's just asking, can any of you confirm just more about the actual physical effects? Potentially, Amy, you just mentioned, something about, dogs having their hair falling out. Like, are there other physical effects, that people like hypertension or other types of effects that may occur from constant noise?
yes, I was going to exactly mention some of those. There is not a lot of research yet directly from data centers, but this is talking about noise in general, no, from other noises. And this type of noise has been linked to anxiety, depression. My understanding is that in some cases, even like suicide for some people. Another type of, so very related to some mental health issues. Bless you.
Can I
You're
just
on
add
mute.
one? Oh, sorry. Was there somebody else going before me? I don't want to interrupt.
No.
Well,
Go ahead, Tracy.
okay. One kind of thread that I'm hearing from my fellow panelists that is really quite powerful is this almost insurmountable barrier of people trying to conceive of things happening to them in their neighborhoods, in their towns and cities that they've never seen before, that are at a scale that is so huge, all of it, right? The physical size, the amount of power and water needed, and the sound. It is inconceivable that because of these huge issues that people at all levels of government aren't doing what would normally be done, is like try to help people understand. And you realize that the reason that's not happening is because the moment they tell the slightest truth about what it is they're doing, people are repulsed by it. There is no part of it that you would want, that you would embrace. If you're a farmer, you don't want a data center next to where you're trying to milk cows. If you're a school, you don't want your kids to be running around like freaking out because the sound is affecting their growing minds and bodies. If you're an adult, right, who has mortgage and bills to pay, and you see your energy costs going up and the water coming out of your faucets turning brown, nobody wants it. And if there's something that people keep trying to shove down your throat that nobody wants, then maybe what is we doing?
Yeah, so we have one other question coming in the chat, and I think it kind of goes back a little bit, Amy, to what you were talking about, the particular difficulty of a case, such as West Virginia. We talked about Mississippi, being another as well, where the state laws are just not in your favor in these cases. And so, we're hearing about and again, we mentioned those states that are reconsidering tax incentives. We've also heard about I think for in the latter half of 2025, the successful efforts to block data centers actually quadrupled. And I think Data Center Watch has now, put the figure at, there's close to $120 billion worth of data center projects that have been blocked around the U.S. But is there a concern that, as some communities are seeing success in stopping, bad projects, is there some risk of seeing them then flood into other zones where, the local laws just don't offer any protections, or, those communities, just don't have the capacity to mount that type of resistance, or are being targeted, because of that. And so, are we seeing that potential risk of seeing, a flood of data centers into some of those areas that are seen as weaker?
Yes.
Yes.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And even within a state where it's already really challenging, that can happen. There are areas of vulnerability within the state. Like, for example, like I was saying, we have in some ways the privilege of having a high profile within the state. And so Joe Manchin has a house here, and there it has a certain amount of cachet within the state where people are saying, well, that doesn't seem to make sense. This is a place, like, why would you want to put a data center right there and a power plant? But we we are working at the state level with other groups who are organizing around the state, because this is not the only proposal at the state level, and all of them are bring your own generation. So they're all huge facilities. It's not just one data center. It's a power plant or a you know with associated hyperscale data center. They all have slightly different designs. And the challenge is we have to make sure that we communicate in a way that's not going to say, well, don't put it here, put it in the southern coal fields. Because there already is a proposal in Mingo County. And so I think the concern is that you have these like nested inequities that are like, oh, it gets moved around, it gets pushed a little further out and closer to a community that maybe doesn't have those resources to fight it, or doesn't know enough about it, or the county commission is, really on board. And so I think that's why it's really important to keep tabs on what's going on at a state level and just say, hey, we're going to collaborate and have the solidarity at a state level to say, we're keeping tabs on what's happening and we're not going to shove it onto someone else. It's really not a NIMBY thing. Like, it's not like backyard chickens. This is a power plant on top of your town. And I don't think anyone should have to deal with that if they don't want it. Now, I will counter, and to what Tracy was saying, that there are people that do want this. It depending on the context. A lot of it has to do with money. There's a lot of marketing going behind this in PR. There are a lot of people that say this is the solution for our state. We have a declining population. We have a lot of issues with the economy, and so they see this as a solution. And we can't say, well, no, we think that's unfair. You shouldn't have a job. So I think that trying to bring and generate evidence to the public and share information with people so communities can make their own decisions, and to be like, okay, if you're a community that feels like this is right for you and you know enough about what's coming for you, then that's really your community's decision. But I think what tends to happen is that communities don't have all the information. So they're being peddled this idea that they're going to be flooded with revenue. And then the county commission saying, oh, whatever, we already have a power plant. What's the big deal? And so I think that can be challenging. We've been saying there is evidence out there, but a lot of that evidence isn't necessarily specifically on data centers. Like the body of evidence on noise, or the body of evidence on air pollution. Like, a lot of these are very specifically tied to other, broader public health literature. They're not necessarily saying, look, this is a data center that caused this. So I think, and there are very few holistic analyses. I think that's something we've been really struggling with, is like, how can we look at this in a holistic way and really understand the costs like the economic costs even, you know, in addition to the health costs. We've done this study on the health costs and how that could affect us, but like what about the economic cost to the county? Because they're saying, oh, you might get X million dollars from this in revenues. We can say, well, you know, we're going to need a new fire engine. We're going to need more emergency services. Our roads are going to get torn up by all these big diesel tankers. There are all these aspects that really will put a big burden on small communities. And so I think that body of evidence is still growing and it's not comprehensive yet. And so I think that's a struggle with folks who are fighting this because they don't necessarily have answers to the questions that they're seeking. Now, that doesn't mean the impacts aren't going to happen that way. And so I think that's the challenge. Yeah.
And I'll say we've already seen this as well. We've seen it in South Carolina. We saw a proposed data center get defeated by a wealthy, mostly white community, and it instantly picked up roots, turned around and said, "Okay, we're going to find the opposite. Let us find a poor black community." And they don't have the political power to fight us in the same way. And so we're seeing that repeat throughout the South. And again, it goes back to they're going to tried and true patterns. You know, if your community has been impacted by LNGs, uh, pipelines, biomass facilities. You know, this pattern is not a new pattern for us. It's like we've seen this throughout the South. We've seen this throughout the country that you go to the most vulnerable populations, the poorest populations. We're seeing this in rural populations that they just don't have the money and the political clout that other communities have. And so they're cherry picking, again, along long-standing systemic impact lines that are, you know, they're just continuing into a new generation in a new form with a new name. And, you know, now it's data centers. It was gaslight pipelines. It's been everything. And so it's following a pattern that we're very familiar with, which is to exploit already exploited areas. And that's, you know, something that communities are having to grapple with. And one thing I haven't heard anybody say, and I know we're getting a little close to time, Amy, you just touched on it. Where is our fire department? I haven't heard anybody talk about community benefit agreements. That if these things are going to come into our community, one thing that the local community to do is establish a community benefit agreement that has real enforceable teeth, not one that is a placate, oh, we'll build you, you know, a nice little library or we'll give you 5,000 for this. But I'm talking about a real community benefit agreement that has community leadership at the table, that the community actually has the power to say something. Otherwise, it's just a check and a nod and it's a nicety. But, you know, one of the things I want to encourage folks on the call to look into is what community benefit agreements can you get? If we could see the states demand community benefit agreements as part of their permitting process for these things, that would be great. But you know, really ones that have teeth and that have community at the table is one piece of this that I've seen we're missing on the local level. And I think it's because of just a lack of awareness that you can ask for a community benefit agreement and you can put real contract teeth into that so that if they fail to meet those conditions, the community actually has a retaliatory measure at their fingertips.
You know, can I just say another observation is the story of communities that have thought back and on, which sometimes are well-resourced communities. What's sad to hear is the lack of solidarity from those winning coalitions when a new community near them is targeted. It's almost as if, oh, we got them out of our backyard, so good luck. And wouldn't that be really powerful to work on that? Like if we're successful, we're going to help everyone in this area be successful because nobody deserves this. But just a thought.
Agreed.
Absolutely, Tracy. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left, but I wanted to see if we can do this because there have been a lot of questions in the chat from people, and we've kind of touched on it a little bit, so maybe we don't have to go into it too much. But I wanted to you know to throw folks a bone because it's an important bone. It's a juicy bone. But there's just been a lot of discussion about AI itself. and this is very important because particularly in the environmental movement, a lot of times we want to isolate the data center from any conversation about AI, and we think we can solve the data center's environmental problem without thinking about AI and what it's doing, why it's there. And so, there are just questions about, people are asking, like, how do we think about AI, in this context, and where should we be, and where should it be in this dialogue? And that's open for anyone.
Mhm. Different types of AI. No, we have the traditional AI that has been used for over 30 years, if not more. And this is the type of AI that is used in climate models, in meteorology for sometimes predicting when the next rain is. This type of AI. No, that's also the AI that is mentioned for identifying cancers in certain images and things like that. And then we have the generative AI, which is the one that uses the most resources. And there is not that much evidence that is helping in many of these other things that tech companies advertise. So in many cases, tech companies are like, yes, there are some impacts, but it can also solve climate change and all that. That's the traditional AI that was happening way before ChatGPT, and that uses a fraction of the resources than some of these tools. So that's a big difference. I heard a comparison this morning, which is like the bee, like imagining a bee, that is the traditional AI. There's the elephant. In terms of magnitude, I love elephants, just in terms of magnitude of how big generative AI is. I had other thing to say, but I forgot, so I'll just pass it to somebody else.
All right. So just really quick, so we have about 8 minutes left. So just, if you want to give just your final thoughts, final impressions. Tracy, you did get one last question about, how to encourage that behavior, that solidarity. If you have any more thoughts on that, you want to give with your final statement.
Sure thing. I
But
appreciate that. Yeah. You know what? Forging ties between different groups of people is never easy, but when it's done, it is the most effective way to counteract the solidarity of the axis of evil. Stealing little George Bush there. Um, um, it can be done. It has been historically done. The late Reverend Jesse Jackson, the Rainbow Coalition, showed he had a multiracial, multi-age coalition of people fighting for justice. Obviously, Dr. Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer. I can go on and on. It has been done. It just must be done. What did Nelson Mandela said? It seems impossible until it's done. So I think that's maybe the next phase here of trying to bridge successful grassroots efforts to more nascent ones and use that people power that protected that area, that region, to folks who are still on the front lines. And then that's where we're going to see cross-racial solidarity and a cross-class solidarity. Again, with those two things happening, we could defeat all fascist efforts in this country, but we have got to get beyond the constraints of race and class in order to make that happen. I say this as if anybody could do it, but we can certainly try.
thank you. Amy Adams.
Yeah, I think, we spent a lot of time talking about the environmental and health today, and we really haven't had time to talk about the sort of the implications of AI. It does have some very promising implications when it comes to science and medicine, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that one, it's talking about replacing millions of jobs. It is talking about, changing what the workforce looks like from today. It is talking, we haven't talked much about what it means for surveillance, what it means for our own agency and our own sovereignty in communities. If AI is part of the police, military, industrial complex, what does that mean for community rights, community sovereignty, and our own agency? And I wanted to touch on the fact that what a lot of these AI algorithms are doing is actually mining us. They are mining our data, our patterns, our information. We are the commodity. So we're building an AI, utilizing local resources, stressing local energy and water, risking people's health. And the goal is to mine us, and we're allowing this. Again, so there's lots we could continue to talk about. So I just want to encourage everybody to continue to dig into this. There are so many more layers to this. There are so many more nuances to even the pieces that we talked about. And I hope you guys will continue to hold this webinar series because we've just scratched the surface of some of the very deep and real conversations that we need to have about AI.
Thank you. Amy?
Yeah, I just yeah, both of those statements really resonate with me. I think in terms of solidarity, it's a funny thing to say, but like we have it sounds cheesy, but something that keeps coming up to me is like a human-centered workforce, which seems like a ridiculous thing to say. But I do think there is a solidarity in just being human in our current context. And I think there's so much that cuts across different groups of people, things that would normally separate us. But I think in terms of solidarity, like there's so much appeal here in terms of things that bring us together and common concerns. And I think being in a context that is so challenging, it's kind of pushed our group to really work on messaging that appeals to everybody as much as possible. And that can feel really unnatural. But I think when it comes down to it, like something that people can do is really try to engage with folks who are from a different political background or a different group or someone you don't know, and really try to talk about this in a way that everyone can get on board with, because I think there are these common concerns that we have that are really bipartisan. And like as a coalition, I think we've seen that, and that's why we've deliberately been nonpartisan, because we want to show that we can work with. We're open to talking with the state. We've sat down and met with people, and we really want to work towards something better. And when you show that willingness to say, like, we're willing to have these conversations about issues that we're all concerned about. We don't need to use certain words that may offend certain people or bring in other people. Let's just get down to business and be like, we're worried about our communities, we're worried about our families, we're worried about water, we're worried about land, and we're worried about air. These are things we can all hold in common. And I think that builds some kind of natural solidarity. And I will say, like, even though this process has kind of been the craziest journey ever and unexpected, it is like the most motivating work I've ever done, to be honest. So yeah, that's my parting thought.
Thank you for that. That was really great. Pablo, you have to follow that. So I don't know how you're going to do it, but
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. And it's like we need to focus on the system, right? Changing the system, similar to climate change. Statistically speaking, there is people in the audience that uses AI for different things. My message to you, my message to them is I don't want to encourage you to feel guilty about it. I feel the people that should be guilty about using AI are the people creating hundreds, if not thousands, of videos of disinformation, of misinformation, and just spreading it for their personal gain. In many of our organizations that we work with, environmental, social issues, generating an agenda here and there, having summarizing the meetings, the notes of a meeting, things like that. This is negligible compared to what some other entities are doing, no? So keep that in mind. Also, things in context, no? Some almost like 600 prompts in one of these tools is the equivalent of like one hamburger, in terms of like resources of energy, water, these type of things. So keeping things in context and really fight for the system change. For example, I know we are on time. As a climate scientist, I was feeling very bad every time. All my family is in Mexico, so I was feeling guilty every time I flew, use a plane to go see my family because of the emissions. No, and then reports come out, papers about celebrities using their personal flights to go everywhere and having hundreds of flights use one single person in their personal flights, and it's like, am I really feeling guilty for seeing my parents once or twice a year using a plane, while there are just orders of magnitude of people like generating way more emissions? So hard conversations, of course, at a personal level, but things to consider before you feel completely guilty about using one of the tools. And not everyone may agree with that.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all for this. Thank the panel and our wonderful moderator, Dr. Shahyd, and thank you all for participating and for joining us this evening. Everybody have a wonderful evening and wonderful weekend. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you all.